I'm not in the gaming industry, obviously, but I have been seeing AAA games take longer to develop than they used to, become crazy expensive to make, and I've been seeing games be announced way before they are ready, which is a dumb move to make. With the first 2 points, a part of it can be chalked up to the fact that video games are more advanced to make now than they used to be in the past. But the third point is that companies need to stop announcing games when they are nowhere close to ready, because people will not forget and it will cause those AAA games grief. With all that said, the way these AAA gaming studios do business makes absolutely no sense to me as a consumer and outsider, because as a business you want to make money. But the way they do things is so questionable at times that it just leaves me scratching my head and frustrated with the lack of products nowadays. So with the intro out of the way, like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video, and let's get to the first point of why the business of AAA games makes no sense. AAA games take longer to make than they used to. With Halo, for example, from the years 2001 to 2010, we got 5 FPS Halo titles, but from 2012 to 2025, we've only had 3. And 2 of them came out in 2012 and 2015, with the other game releasing in 2021. And there is no news on when the next Halo title will release. Now, even with macrotransactions and other money-making schemes taken into account, you can only make so much money from a game. So eventually, with how long games take to make, and how much more expensive it is to develop AAA games, the costs are going to eventually become unsustainable for companies to make profit. Some of you may think that the answer is to raise the price of the game from $70 to something like $80 or $100. But if they go too far, then they'll hurt themselves for not hitting price optimization. And that term is the price of an item at the highest demand. So if the price is too high, then less people will buy the game, hurting profits. And if they make it too cheap, then more people will have the game, which is good, but they'll still lose profits anyways from making the price too low. Now I know free-to-play is a business model that can work, but not every game can do it. And it's very risky to do, since the game has to hook the players into wanting to buy the cosmetics or whatever they're selling in place of the entry fee that all games normally have. Also, I'd like to point out that the monetization schemes in games nowadays is partially a reaction to how much more games like Halo, Call of Duty, or any other AAA game you can think of costs them to make, because otherwise they would not be able to make the profits back on their games, or make the profits they want, because these companies are greedy wallet humpers. So with that issue explained, the obvious first thing that makes no sense is why these AAA studios have not figured out ways to cut the cost of production. Because the first thing I could think of that would help cut costs is having less people work on the game that is being made. I do believe the saying that too many cooks in the kitchen spoils the broth. And this saying applies to game development. For example, more people worked on Halo Infinite than Halo 3. But Halo 3 launched with more gameplay features, more customization options, and it had Team Slayer as a dedicated playlist at launch. The next thing AAA games can do to cut the cost of production is to reuse assets. You know how much better Halo Infinite would have been and easier for them to do if they would have just reused the assets they made in Halo MCC instead of remaking every system from scratch? We wouldn't have had to wait for career ranks, the exchange, the match composer, and we may have even been given functional menus, because the ones they made for Halo Infinite are still slow and don't work sometimes even now. If 343 reused the game assets they made from Halo 4 and 5, then Halo Infinite could have had the most diverse sandbox of any Halo game ever, instead of the limited one which lacks vehicles and weapon variety. The next thing I thought of that AAA studios could do to cut the cost of production is to focus on the stuff that actually matters. When Halo Infinite released, it performed like garbage. Their post-launch content sucked, and we had no Forge for about a year. The engine they spent a lot of time developing was not time well spent, and the overall product suffered because of it. 343 could have used the old engine they used before Halo Infinite to make a more stable game like Halo 4 and Halo 5 was. But instead, they wasted time on a new engine that is so bad that they are now moving to Unreal Engine for future projects. Also, since we're on the topic of reusing assets, a good way to keep fans happy while the next big title is being produced, and a good way to make even more profit, is to reuse the assets you made from the last game to make a spin-off game or two. Some people may complain in the beginning, but if the game is good enough, no one will care that it's an asset flip. In fact, some of the greatest games of all time have been asset flips. Examples including Majora's Mask, KOTOR 2, Fallout New Vegas, Halo 3 ODST, and Fallout 76. It makes no sense that AAA companies don't do this because no fan wants to wait around a decade or more for the next title of their favorite game series. And AAA companies could make more money from the cheap spin-off to help fund the next big $200 million project instead of making no money at all. Now, the next thing I will discuss that makes no sense is when AAA companies announce their next big AAA game that's not going to come out anytime soon. Here are some of the reasons it is a bad idea to announce AAA games early. It builds up hype for a game that is not going to be released anytime soon. And you do not want people imagining for too long how great the game will be, because that will set up unrealistic expectations that just cannot be met. AAA companies also shouldn't release a trailer too early, because if they do, then anybody who works at the company will always be asked about it until the game is either canceled or released. And for a good example on why you should not release an announcement trailer or teaser too early, just look at The Elder Scrolls 6. They announced the game with a teaser back in 2018, and now fan expectation has gotten insanely high. And for your employees, that is a ton of pressure, because if the game turns out to not be worth the decade plus wait, then the backlash Bethesda got for Fallout 76 and Starfield will be nothing compared to what awaits them with The Elder Scrolls 6. So in conclusion on why I think AAA games, business-wise, make no sense nowadays, they will eventually plateau in how much money they can earn, because only so many people will buy your game before you reach the maximum limit of customers possible. So you can only make so much money to cover the costs that keep going higher and higher. And if profits stagnate, then you will eventually reach a point where you cannot make the money back on your product. So it makes no sense that AAA companies are not trying to figure out ways to cut costs immediately to avoid that inevitable financial hit. I will give them credit though for using cash shops and other monetization schemes to temporarily alleviate the problem. But it fails as a long-term solution because gamers hate in-game shops, and there's only so much money your audience will give you at any one time. So my thought process is, why are you not decreasing the cost of game production, especially when you have a game like Halo Infinite, which was one of the worst launches and post-launches I have ever seen. I played a match of Halo Infinite once, and my ping reached 2000 and the lobby broke. It was so bad that everyone was actually talking to each other on my team to make sure that it was not just them. And just as a reminder, that was probably hundreds of millions of dollars as a guess, because we don't have official numbers. The fact that they made a new engine, or, upgraded the engine, whatever you want to call it. The fact that it took 6 years between Halo 5 and Halo Infinite, and the game was in that state. And I use Halo Infinite as an example for most of the video, because it's the game I'm most familiar with. But the most recent hundreds of millions of dollar failure would be Concord. And just look at how much money they spent on a game that didn't last a month. It makes no sense in my eyes, and probably in the eyes of other people. It's like, why are you putting so much money in this game? Lastly, AAA companies need to stop announcing games that are not ready to launch in at least a year. Because the longer you make people wait, the higher their expectations will become, and the more pressure you end up putting on yourself, and the blowback you'll get if the game sucks will be enormous. I have been waiting forever for The Elder Scrolls 6, and when that game comes out, I'll probably enjoy it. But let's be honest here, guys. It's probably not going to hit fan expectation, and there's going to be a large blowback on Steam and YouTube. But I could be wrong. I hope I'm wrong. I hope they blow it out of the water, but let's be realistic about it. And I've also been waiting for the KOTOR remake, Star Wars Eclipse, and I was waiting for The Outer Worlds 2, but they finally announced it. Thanks for watching the video. Let me know in the comments your opinions, because I'm no expert on this topic. And
I'm sorry, sir. It's time for you to leave.